That Sunday, my father stood at the pulpit, his smile serene. "We forgive," he preached to the congregation. In the foyer moments later, my stepmother's hand cracked against my cheek. No one saw, or perhaps they chose not to. I didn't cry. I simply met the steady, blinking red light of the nursery camera mounted on the ceiling. Tomorrow, at the company, I would deliver my own sermon. The topic? Transparency. My name is Nora Vale. I am 29 years old, and on Sunday mornings, I hold the door. St. Laureate's Cathedral in Halberd is a monument to carefully managed light. The city outside is all steel and glass, a forest of right angles and mirrored surfaces that throw the sun back at the sky. But inside St. Laureate's, the light is tamed. It pours through towering panes of stained glass, bleeding colors onto the plush crimson runner that bisects the nave. It depicts saints in tortured ecstasy and stoic martyrdom, their jewel-toned suffering splashing across the polished pine pews and the faces of the faithful. The air itself feels curated, a heavy concoction of lemon-scented wood polish, the faint, waxy aroma of snuffed prayer candles, and the thin, slightly burnt smell of the complimentary coffee brewing in urns out in the foyer. It is the scent of respectable devotion. As the head of operations analysis for Northbridge Mutual, my week is a cascade of data points, risk assessments, and logistical projections. But on Sunday, my function is simpler. I stand at the main entrance, my hand on the cold, ornate brass handle of a 10-foot oak door, and I regulate the flow of bodies. I offer a small, practiced smile that doesn't reach my eyes. I receive nods from men in tailored suits whose companies I analyze for inefficiencies, and polite greetings from women whose charity galas are legendary. They see a young woman performing a humble service. They see Jonah Vale's quiet, dutiful daughter. They see exactly what they are meant to see. Today, my father, Jonah, stands at the lectern, bathed in a column of sapphire and gold light from the depiction of St. Peter's Absolution. His voice, a familiar baritone honed in boardrooms and amplified by an excellent sound system, fills every corner of the sanctuary. He is the chief financial officer of St. Laureate's, a volunteer position that carries more weight in this city than many elected offices. He speaks of forgiveness. The Apostle Paul tells us in his letter to the Ephesians, he intones, his eyes sweeping across the congregation, pausing here and there to make a personal connection. To be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. He lets the words settle. The silence in the cathedral is absolute, reverent. Not once, not twice, but 70 times 7. I watch him from my post, my body angled slightly away from the pews. I can see the back of my stepmother's head 2 rows from the front. Mirabelle, her auburn hair is perfectly coiffed, a helmet of expensive precision. She is the chief operating officer at Northbridge Mutual, my boss's boss's boss. She sits with a posture of serene attentiveness, a portrait of grace, from the back. You cannot see the tension in her jaw, but I know it's there. I have learned to read the subtle tells in the architecture of her body. The sermon concludes with a hymn. The organ swells, a tide of sound that seems to lift the very roof. As the final notes fade, the rustle of movement begins. The service is over. My work at the door becomes more active now, holding it wide as the congregation streams out into the foyer, their voices rising from a pious hush to a sociable murmur. My father is immediately surrounded, shaking hands, clapping shoulders. Mirabelle materializes at his side, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. I see them through the throng, a power couple in their Sunday best, the very picture of civic and spiritual leadership. Eventually, they make their way towards me. "A beautiful service, Jonah," says Mr. Abernathy, the CEO of a shipping conglomerate. "The Lord's words, not mine," my father replies with practiced humility. Mirabelle catches my eye as they approach. Her smile tightens by a millimeter. She waits until they are beside me. shielded from the main flow of traffic by the bulk of the heavy door. She leans in, her perfume, a sharp floral scent, cutting through the smells of coffee and old wood. "Don't cause a scene," she whispers. Her voice is a silken thread of sound, inaudible to anyone else. As she speaks, her fingers find my left wrist. They are surprisingly strong. Her thumb presses down, directly onto the center of a fading yellowish bruise from last Tuesday. A sharp, radiating ache lances up my forearm. It is a precise and practiced application of pain, a reminder. I don't flinch. I keep the placid, slightly vacant smile on my face. "Of course not," I murmur back, my eyes on the departing parishioners. We are in the foyer now, a wide, marble-floored space where the business of the church continues under the guise of fellowship. People cluster around the coffee urns and pastry trays. The chatter is of stock options, upcoming zoning board meetings, and college applications, all interspersed with the appropriate scriptural platitudes. My father is holding court near the welcome desk, accepting praise for his sermon. Mirabelle stands slightly apart with me, a proprietary hand still resting on my arm, as if guiding a child. She waits for a moment when the treasurer, a woman named Eleanor, is looking in our direction while talking to someone else. She waits for a lull in the noise, and then her hand moves. It is not a wild, uncontrolled swing. It is a short, sharp, economical motion. Her palm, dry and cool, connects with my left cheek. The sound is not loud, but it is distinct. A flat, sharp crack that seems to absorb the air around it. It feels like a sudden, localized burst of heat, a stunning impact that vibrates through the bones of my skull. For a split second, the scent of her perfume is intensely close, mingled with the faint, acidic smell of her skin. I take half a step back, my heel catching on the edge of the carpet runner. My vision blurs for an instant. Above the hum of conversation, I am suddenly aware of the large, round clock on the far wall. I watch the long, thin, second hand stutter forward, one precise, deliberate tick. The world has not stopped. It has just narrowed, sharpened to a single, burning point on my face. My gaze lifts from the clock. I don't look at Mirabelle. I don't look at the people around us. My eyes travel upwards, scanning the ornate plasterwork of the ceiling until they find it. In the corner, where the foyer meets the hallway leading to the nursery and Sunday school rooms, is a small, black, hemispherical dome, a security camera, the nursery camera, installed last year as part of a new child protection policy. A tiny, ruby-red light on its housing blinks with metronomic regularity. On, off, on. It is recording. It is a silent, impartial witness. I feel a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I turn my head slowly, the skin on my cheek screaming in protest. Eleanor, the church treasurer, has paused in her conversation. She is looking directly at us. Her eyes meet mine. There is a moment of stark, unadorned recognition in them. She saw it. Her mouth is a thin, straight line. She blinks once, a slow, deliberate motion. Then, she turns her head and resumes her conversation about the annual budget as if nothing has happened. She has chosen not to see. Mirabelle steps closer, her body blocking me from the rest of the room. Her face is a mask of cold fury, her eyes chips of ice. She lowers her voice to a venomous hiss, so close I can feel the warmth of her breath. "You owe me silence," she seethes. The words hang in the air between us, an invoice for my compliance, for my complicity in my own erasure. The burning on my cheek begins to subside, replaced by a cold, spreading clarity. The camera is still blinking. Eleanor is still pretending. My father is still smiling, talking about forgiveness. I look at Mirabelle, truly look at her, for the first time since she struck me. My own voice, when it comes, is a near whisper, devoid of heat or tremor. It is as calm and measured as a line item on a spreadsheet. "I owe you a receipt," I say. Her eyes narrow. She doesn't understand, not yet, but a flicker of uncertainty crosses her face. It is enough. I turn without another word and walk away. I don't move quickly. I don't run. My steps are even and measured as I cross the marble floor. I bypass the clusters of chatting parishioners, ignoring the few who offer me a parting smile. I push open the heavy oak door and step out into the bright, indifferent afternoon of Halberd. The cool air feels good against my hot cheek. The city's noise, the distant wail of a siren, the hum of traffic, the murmur of pedestrians, rushes in to fill the silence. I walk down the wide stone steps of the cathedral, my hand already reaching into my purse for my phone. I don't look back. My fingers are steady as I unlock the screen. I ignore the missed calls and text notifications. I open the Northbridge Mutual internal corporate application, my thumb moving through the familiar menus with practiced efficiency. I navigate to the corporate calendar, then to the executive presentation schedules. I find her name easily, Mirabelle Vale. Tomorrow, Monday, 8:30 a.m. Topic: Corporate Social Responsibility and Community Transparency Strategy. Location: Executive Boardroom, 23rd floor. I stare at the entry, the blinking red light of the nursery camera superimposed over it in my mind's eye. The receipt. I have the time, the place, and the subject. The system is in place. The tools are all there. Her tools, my father's tools, their world of order, accountability, and process. Tomorrow, on the 23rd floor, I will deliver a sermon of my own. Halberd is a city built on the gospel of the grid. Its streets are a logical matrix of asphalt and concrete, flanked by towers of glass and steel that aspire to geometric perfection. It is a city of clean lines, hard data, and quantifiable returns. In a place like this, a cathedral like St. Laureate's shouldn't exist. It's an architectural anomaly of soaring arches, irrational faith, and unprovable assertions. Yet, it thrives. Because in Halberd, St. Laureate's is not a house of worship. It is the Sunday boardroom, the spiritual annex of the corporate world, where deals are consecrated with a handshake over coffee and pastries after a sermon on communal grace. It's where the city's management class comes to network under the benevolent gaze of stained glass saints, laundering their weekday ambitions in the holy water of weekend piety. This ecosystem of power has two chief architects. The first is my father, Jonah Vale, the volunteer chief financial officer of St. Laureate's. He manages the church's considerable endowments and funds, the final destination for the tax-deductible largesse of Halberd's corporate citizens. The second is my stepmother, Mirabelle Vale, the chief operating officer of Northbridge Mutual, one of the city's largest financial institutions and a significant source of that largesse. He is the shepherd of the church's flock of dollars. She is the executive who guides those dollars toward the fold. It is a perfect, self-sustaining loop of influence and prestige, a polished synergy of God and mammon. And I work at the heart of it, at Northbridge Mutual. I earned my position. I came in through the main entrance, with a degree, a dozen interviews that felt more like interrogations, and a technical skills test that took 4 hours. I was hired because I could build predictive models from chaotic data sets and present them in a way that even a marketing executive could understand. My value was quantifiable. Mirabelle entered the company 2 years later through a side door, one that opened directly into the C-suite. She came in with a formidable reputation and the implicit endorsement of my father, who was already a major figure in the city's financial landscape. My father called it a blessing. A family united in purpose, he'd said at a celebratory dinner, raising a glass of expensive wine. All of us working together, guided by our faith and our fiduciary duty to the shareholders. The phrase was so perfectly Jonah, so seamlessly weaving the sacred and the profane that I almost admired it. We were a family, aligned toward God and shareholder value. The foundation for this blessed union was laid 2.5 years ago. On the day my mother died, her illness was brief and brutal, a fire that consumed her from the inside out. I remember the logistics of it more than the emotions, the hushed phone calls, the smell of antiseptic, the terrible efficiency of the hospital machines. After she was gone, The house I grew up in fell into a state of suspended animation. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand, her favorite coat still on the hook by the door. It was a museum of a life suddenly ended. 6 months to the day after the funeral, Mirabelle moved in. Her arrival was not an intrusion. It was an acquisition, a merger. She didn't just occupy the empty spaces. She re-engineered them. My mother's soft, floral print furniture was replaced by sleek, minimalist pieces in shades of gray and chrome. The overgrown garden was professionally landscaped into a severe geometric design. Mirabelle moved through our home with the same confident, dispassionate efficiency she applied to a corporate restructuring, eliminating redundancies and optimizing every room for a clean, modern aesthetic. My father called it a fresh start. It felt more like a hostile takeover. This pattern continued at work, at Northbridge. I was good at my job. My analyses were sharp, my reports clean. In team meetings, I would offer suggestions for process improvements, ways to streamline our data funnels or enhance risk modeling. My immediate superiors would nod, impressed. They would encourage me to formalize the proposals, and so I would spend weeks developing a plan, building the models, and writing the documentation. My proposals were always received with enthusiastic praise from my direct managers. Mirabelle's official response, delivered via email, was always the same. "This is very well thought out, Nora. Thank you for your proactive engagement. We welcome this kind of input." And then, nothing. The proposal would vanish into the digital ether of the executive wing, disappearing into Mirabelle's inbox like a prayer into a black hole. 3 months after I submitted a detailed plan to overhaul our archaic risk assessment protocols, a plan that would have saved the company an estimated $4 million in its first year, a memo announced a new synergistic risk optimization initiative. It was a clunky, less effective version of my own plan, championed by a different department head, a man known for being one of Mirabelle's loyalists. My contribution was never mentioned. My ideas were welcomed, and then they were strip-mined for parts, their value extracted and redistributed. My name erased from the equation. The discovery began, as most things do, with a single, anomalous data point. As part of my familial duty, I had volunteered to help the St. Laureate's Finance Committee digitize their records. It was tedious work, cross-referencing years of paper ledgers with bank statements. They saw it as the quiet daughter being helpful. I saw it as an opportunity to understand the machine from the inside. One evening, while reconciling Northbridge Mutual's corporate giving report with the church's donation logs, I saw the name, the Helios Outreach Fund. Helios was one of Northbridge's flagship charitable arms, a high-profile fund dedicated to community enrichment. I saw a significant recurring quarterly donation from Helios to the St. Laureate's Benevolent Fund. The Benevolent Fund was a discretionary fund controlled by the Finance Committee, intended to help community members in crisis. But the numbers from Helios were too clean, too consistent. Charity is rarely so predictable. It was a quiet hum of static and an otherwise clean signal, a question mark. My curiosity, once piqued, becomes a quiet obsession. Using my credentials at Northbridge, I began to follow the money. It wasn't a straight path. The funds from Helios Outreach didn't flow directly to the church. They were first routed to a holding company called Apex Philanthropic Ventures. From Apex, the money was dispersed to a second entity, a consulting firm named Silver Spire Group. From Silver Spire, it was funneled to a third, before finally landing in the account of a limited liability company I had never heard of, Marina Gate Services, LLC, and from Marina Gate, a slightly smaller, less uniform amount would then be donated to the church's benevolent fund. It was a classic rinse cycle, a web of transactions designed to make the money appear to come from multiple, unrelated sources, and to shave a significant percentage off the top before the charitable donation was finally made. The web was intricate and professionally constructed. The paper trail was immaculate, but digital systems have memories, and people have egos. A public records search on Marina Gate Services, LLC, gave me a name, a woman I didn't recognize, but a quick search of her name on social media platforms brought up a gallery of photos. Photos of her on a boat, laughing with her arm around a familiar, perfectly coiffed redhead, Mirabelle. The owner of Marina Gate Services was Mirabelle's sister-in-law. Even then, it was circumstantial. Plausible deniability was built into every layer of the structure. It was a clean, elegant system of graft, hidden in plain sight behind the respectable veneers of corporate charity and religious benevolence. It was perfect. Until it wasn't. The mistake, when it came, was laughably small. It was a single character in a string of code. An invoice was submitted from Marina Gate Services to the Silver Spire Group for strategic community consulting, but on the electronic payment request, the routing number was entered with a hyphen instead of a period. A simple, human error, a typo, the automated payment system at the bank, a system I had helped design a model for 3 years ago, rejected the transaction. It created an error log, a single line of red text in a report that crossed my desk. A report I was only cleared to see because my team was auditing the efficiency of the payment software. The log contained the invoice number, the sender, the recipient, and the reason for failure. It was the key, the one hard, verifiable link between two nodes in the web that were never supposed to touch directly. It was a documented error, a crack in the polished facade. I printed a hard copy of that error log. I can still feel the memory of the warm paper coming out of the printer in my empty office late one night. I folded it carefully and placed it in a secure file on a personal drive. That single sheet of paper, the product of a careless keystroke, was the thread. And once I had it, I knew I could pull and keep pulling until the entire tapestry of their carefully woven world unraveled. In the sunlit foyer of St. Laureate's, surrounded by the powerful and the pious, they call me Jonah's girl, the quiet one, that nice, devout young woman who is always so willing to help. They see a lamb. They have no idea that my mind is an abacus, constantly clicking, calculating, and logging every transaction. They believe in forgiveness and grace. I believe in the immutable logic of numbers. They told me I was a good girl who knew her place. They were wrong. I am just a person who knows how to count. The lock on my apartment door clicked shut with a heavy, satisfying finality. For a moment, I leaned my back against it, the cool wood a grounding presence. The air inside was still and silent, a stark contrast to the performative fellowship of the cathedral. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic, shallow rhythm of my own breathing. I focused on that, slowing it down. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 6. A technique a therapist taught me years ago. It worked. The adrenaline began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. The emotional storm had passed. Now came the work of damage assessment and strategic planning. I did not go to the mirror to inspect my face. The stinging had subsided to a dull, throbbing ache, a physical reminder I didn't need. The visual would only be a distraction, an invitation to an emotional response I couldn't afford. Instead, I went to my home office, a small, spare room with a large monitor and a meticulously organized desk. I switched on the overhead light, a bright white LED that stripped the room of all shadow. This was a clinical space. My first action was documentation. I retrieved a small, flexible sewing ruler from a desk drawer. I sat at the desk, angled my chair to get the best direct light, and held up my left wrist. Mirabelle's thumbprint was already beginning to bloom, a mottled purple and blue oval on the pale skin, perfectly centered on the older, yellowing bruise beneath. I laid the ruler beside the mark, making sure the centimeter markings were clear and in focus. I picked up my phone, opened the camera app, and took a series of high-resolution photographs from multiple angles. Macro focus, no flash. I reviewed each image, zooming in to ensure the details of the contusion were sharp, the numbers on the ruler perfectly legible. Satisfied, I transferred the files to a secure, encrypted drive on my laptop. I labeled the folder Chain of Custody, MV, The first image was renamed Evidence 01 Vale N 202251012 1430 as JPG, timestamped, dated, cataloged. The process was impersonal, methodical. I was treating my own body as a crime scene, which, in a procedural sense, it was. Next, I opened my encrypted email client. I composed a new message. In the to field, I typed the name of Arthur Vance, the general counsel for Northbridge Mutual. He was a creature of pure corporate law, a man who saw the world not in terms of right and wrong, but of liability and compliance. The subject line was precise. Confidential. For counsel review. Helios Outreach Fund discrepancies. The body of the email was brief, containing only 2 sentences. Arthur, please find attached a preliminary analysis of certain fund transfers related to the Helios Outreach Initiative. I believe a further review by your department may be warranted. I clicked the paperclip icon and attached the file. It was a flowchart I had built weeks ago, a clean, elegant diagram that visually mapped the convoluted journey of Northbridge's money through the shell companies. Culminating at Marina Gate Services, it was annotated with dates, transaction numbers, and the name of Mirabelle's sister-in-law. It was a declaration of war disguised as a due diligence report. My finger hovered over the send button, but I did not click it. I saved the message to my drafts folder. It sat there, a digital landmine, armed and waiting for a trigger. My third step was to create an independent, official record of the physical event. I opened my web browser and navigated to the online portal for my primary care physician. I logged in and scheduled an appointment for the earliest available slot the next morning. Monday, 9:45 a.m. For the reason for visit, I scrolled through the drop-down menu of generic ailments until I found the one I was looking for. I selected injury soft tissue. It was the perfect description. Medically accurate, legally sterile, and emotionally neutral. The system confirmed the appointment. Another piece was now in place. A medical professional would document the injury, creating a time-stamped report that would exist entirely outside the sphere of my family or my company. The fourth piece of the puzzle resided in the most unlikely of places, the St. Laureate's Church website. It was a clumsy, outdated platform, likely built by a well-meaning but amateur volunteer. I navigated through pages of sermon archives and potluck sign-up sheets until I found the internal portal for ministry volunteers. My login, approved by my father himself a month ago when he'd insisted I take a more active administrative role in the finance volunteer group, gave me elevated access. I found the tab labeled Campus Security. Under it, a link. Nursery Cam Live Feed and Archive. The live feed was password protected, accessible only to the nursery staff on Sunday mornings, but the church's new child protection policy, a document I had helped proofread, stipulated that all footage from the camera was to be automatically archived and stored for a rolling period of 72 hours. This was to provide a record in case of any incidents involving the children. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. A system designed to protect the innocent was about to be used to condemn the guilty. I opened the video extraction request form. It was a simple online document. I filled in my name and my role as a volunteer team admin. For the date and time of the required footage, I entered today's date and a window from 12:15 p.m. to 12:45 p.m. In the reason for request field, I wrote, to review volunteer positioning and general traffic flow in the main foyer during post-service dismissal. The goal is to identify potential bottlenecks and optimize the welcome process for improved safety and efficiency. It was the kind of banal, process-oriented corporate jargon that no one would ever question. I cited the specific paragraph in the volunteer handbook that granted team admins the right to review procedures, a right my father had proudly pointed out to me when he signed the paperwork. I submitted the form. An automated email would be sent to the church administrator, who would, I knew, process the request without a second thought. The video file would be in my inbox by morning. With the evidence collection in motion, I set the timeline. I opened my calendar and created a new event. Monday, 8:30 a.m. Title: M. Veil presentation, exec boardroom. I set 2 alerts. One for 30 minutes before, one for 5. The event stared back at me from the screen, a fixed point in the future around which everything else would now revolve. This is the path I chose. I did not pick up the phone and dial 911. The police would turn this into a spectacle. It would become a messy, unpredictable, she said, a domestic dispute. My father's reputation would be brought to bear. His influence used to muddy the waters. Mirabelle would paint me as unstable, vindictive, a troubled daughter lashing out. In the court of public opinion, I would lose before I even began. I am not interested in that kind of justice. I am interested in consequences. So I am not reporting her to the law. Not yet. I am reporting her to the process, to the systems she and my father believe in, the ones they have built and mastered, the corporate bylaws, the financial protocols, the chain of command, the audit trail. These are the scriptures of their world, and I will use them to write her judgment. My vow, made in the silent aftermath of that slap, is simple. There will be no raised voices, no messy tears, no blood, only signatures. The signature on a falsified invoice, the digital signature of an illicit fund transfer, the signature on a doctor's report, the signature of a board chairman on a letter of termination. This will be a quiet, clinical execution, carried out with the stroke of a pen. The plan has 3 critical components, 3 cuts of a surgeon's scalpel. The first is data, the cold, hard, irrefutable evidence of both her financial and physical transgressions. The second is disclosure, the delivery of this data to the precise audience, at the precise moment, that will cause maximum systemic effect, the board of directors, in a room built for accountability. The third is timing, the perfect synchronization of these events to create a feedback loop of consequence, giving her no time to lie, no room to escape, no opportunity to spin a narrative. "We forgive," my father said, his voice echoing in the sanctified air of the cathedral. Forgiveness, in their world, it is a tool, a release valve for guilt, a social lubricant that allows the powerful to transgress without consequence. It is a word they use to wipe the slate clean without ever having to account for what was written on it. But I am an analyst. I deal in ledgers, not in grace, and on my ledger, there is no line item for forgiveness, not until every transaction has been recorded, every asset has been accounted for, and every debt has been paid in full. There is no absolution before the audit. Monday morning began not with coffee, but with the sterile, antiseptic smell of a medical examination room. The paper crinkled under me as I sat on the edge of the table, my left wrist upturned under the bright, circular lamp of the examination light. Dr. Anya Sharma was a woman in her late 40s, efficient and professional, her eyes missing nothing. She gently prodded the edges of the bruise on my wrist with a gloved finger. "And you said this happened yesterday afternoon?" she asked, her tone neutral, her eyes focused on the injury. "That's correct," I replied, my voice as steady and detached as hers. She made a note on the tablet in her other hand. "The contusion presents with discoloration consistent with subcutaneous bleeding from a blunt force impact. The shape is ovoid, approximately 4 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters. She took a small, transparent ruler from a drawer and held it next to the bruise, much as I had done, and snapped a quick, clinical photo with the tablet. "The presentation is consistent with the focused pressure of a thumb or a similar object." She then moved to my face, examining my cheek, which now had a faint, yellowish tint under the harsh light. "And the facial contusion?" "Related incident," I said simply. She nodded, her expression unreadable. She typed for a moment more, the quiet tapping of her stylus the only sound in the room. "I'm logging it under the ICD-10 code S60.222A. Contusion of left wrist, initial encounter, and S00.83XA for the cheek. The notes will reflect the details of the examination. I'd recommend a cold compress for the next 24 hours to help with any swelling." She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. There was no pity in her gaze, only a quiet professionalism. Is there anything else you need to discuss? Nora? Anything regarding the circumstances of the injury? No, doctor, I said. This is sufficient. I just needed it documented. She nodded once, a gesture of understanding. The transaction was complete. I had my first official receipt, filed away in the immutable archives of a healthcare provider's database. By the time I returned to my apartment, an email was waiting for me. The subject line was foyer camera footage, request processed. The body of the email contained a link to a downloadable MP4 file. I poured a cup of black coffee, the first of the day, and sat down at my desk to review the evidence. The file downloaded quickly. I opened it in a video editing suite, not to alter it, but to analyze it frame by frame. The camera's perspective was high and wide, capturing the entire expanse of the marble-floored foyer. The timestamp in the corner of the frame was in stark military time. The resolution wasn't cinematic, but it was clear enough. People milled about like ants, their faces indistinct at this distance. I scrubbed forward to the relevant time. I found us easily, standing near the large oak doors. The video was silent at first, the ambient microphone struggling to pick up anything more than a dull roar of conversation. I watched the scene unfold again in grainy color. I saw Mirabelle lean in. I saw her hand move. It was fast, almost imperceptible in the flow of movement around us. But on playback, slowed to 1/4 speed, it was undeniable. Her hand, the short, sharp motion. My head recoiling, I saw Eleanor, the treasurer, turn her head, her eyes on us for a full 3 seconds, before turning away, the perfect, silent witness to a crime of plausible deniability. I isolated the audio track and ran it through a filter, boosting the levels and stripping out the background hum. It was mostly noise, but then, for a brief 2-second window, I got it, a faint, tinny hiss, but the words were intelligible if you knew what to listen for. Oh me silence. It was thin, but it was there. I saved a separate audio file of the enhanced clip. Next, I opened the volunteer duty roster from the church's internal portal. It was a simple spreadsheet. It logged my check-in time at 8:45 a.m. and my checkout time at 12:51 p.m. The wall clock in the video, clearly visible behind Mirabelle's head, read 12:37 p.m. When she struck me, I took a screenshot of the video frame showing the clock and my face. I took another screenshot of the duty roster with my name and times highlighted. I layered the 2 images side by side in a single file. Time, place, and presence, all forensically established. My second receipt. Now for the third, and most critical, set of records. I logged into the Northbridge Mutual Corporate Network through a secure VPN. My access level as head of operations analysis gave me clearance to query non-financial metadata logs from across the company's various platforms. All under the umbrella of system efficiency analysis, I built a query. It was specific and narrow, designed to attract no attention. I pulled the user access logs for the Helios Outreach Fund's administrative portal for the past 3 months, filtered for a single user ID, M. Vale. The results populated in seconds, a list of dates, timestamps, and IP addresses, a log of every time Mirabelle had accessed the fund's back end. I exported the list. Then, I cross-referenced it with another set of data, the St. Laureate's Public Events Calendar. For the past year, my father had instituted a new initiative, monthly benevolent fund prayer vigils, special evening services dedicated to raising awareness and funds for the church's charitable works. I placed the 2 datasets side by side on my monitor. The pattern jumped out immediately, a perfect, damning correlation. On the evening of August 12th, the church held a prayer vigil. At 9:17 p.m. that same night, Mirabelle's user ID logged into the Helios portal from her home IP address. Bank records I had previously and discreetly obtained showed that at 9:24 p.m., a transfer of $200,000 was initiated from Helios to Apex Philanthropic Ventures. On September 16th, another vigil. At 9:08 p.m., another login from Mirabelle. At 9:15 p.m., a transfer of $150,000. It was the same for every single prayer event. She was using the church's own fundraising schedule as a cover for her largest embezzlements, a cynical and poetic act of blasphemy. The data didn't just suggest a crime, it described a methodology. The final piece I needed was the delivery mechanism. A frontal assault was too risky. I needed to use her own momentum against her. I ran a deep search of Mirabelle's corporate email archive, using a search string for keywords like presentation, board, deck, and test. It took less than a minute. I found an email she had sent to herself last Friday. The subject line was test. The body was empty. It had one attachment, a PowerPoint file named Community Transparency Q3.px. The file size was 212 kilobytes. It was a blank template, a placeholder she had sent to ensure the email system would handle the attachment size for her real presentation. It was the perfect Trojan horse. I downloaded the blank attachment. Then, I opened the presentation I had been building for weeks. It was my own Community Transparency Q3 PPTX. I had designed it to mimic the official Northbridge branding. The same fonts, the same color palette, the same logo placement on every slide, but my content was different. It was 40 slides long. Slides 1 to 5 were a bland introduction to the Helios Fund, using publicly available marketing copy. Slides 6 to 10 detailed the fund's stated mission of community transparency. Slide 11 was a high-level flowchart. It showed the official, approved path of Helios funds. Slide 12 was a new flowchart. A dark red line branched off from the official path, snaking its way through Apex Ventures, Silver Spire Group, and landing on a box labeled Marina Gate Services, LLC. Slides 13 to 20 were a series of screenshots of bank transfer confirmations, each one corresponding to a prayer vigil date. Slides 21-25 displayed the corporate registration for Marina Gate, with her sister-in-law's name circled in red. Slides 26-30 showed screenshots of social media photos of Mirabelle and her sister-in-law together. Slide 31 was a QR code. When scanned, it would link to a secure cloud folder containing every piece of evidence I had: the video, the audio clip, the error log, the full data sets. Slide 32 was a screenshot of my doctor's patient portal, showing the confirmed diagnosis: contusion of left wrist. My name and the doctor's were redacted, but the ICD-10 code was visible. Slide 39 was a single, full-screen, high-resolution photograph: my bruised wrist, the ruler clearly visible beside it. Beneath the image, in the clean, corporate Northbridge font, was a single line of text: benevolence is not violence. Slide 40 was a blank, black screen. I meticulously adjusted the file, adding and removing tiny, invisible image assets until its size was exactly 212 kilobytes. Then I went back to the test email in her sent items. I used an administrator-level tool, one I had access to for system diagnostics, to swap the original blank attachment with my own file. The name was the same, the size was the same. The digital record would show that she had sent this file to herself. It was her presentation now. The final steps were physical. I printed 3 copies of a condensed 10-page summary report of my findings. I slid each one into a thick manila envelope. I printed 3 labels, one for Arthur Vance, General Counsel, one for Marcus Thorne, Chairman of the Board, and one for Eleanor Vance, Treasurer, St. Laureate's Cathedral. I sealed each envelope. They felt heavy, dense with consequence. My last act was to set the failsafe. I returned to the draft email to Arthur Vance, the one with the flowchart attached. I added the entire board of directors to the BCC line. I clicked the Schedule Send option. A small dialog box appeared. I set the delivery time: Monday, 9:05 a.m., 5 minutes after her presentation was scheduled to begin. If she somehow evaded the meeting, if she called in sick, if my plan with the presentation file failed, this email would detonate anyway. There was no way out. I stood up from my desk and looked at the 3 sealed envelopes lying in a neat row. I had collected all the receipts. The transaction was ready to be closed. The hours between dawn and the meeting were a period of intense, quiet calibration. The machine was built. Now I had to set the final gears and ensure the timing was perfect to the millisecond. My actions were precise, each one a small, deliberate turn of a screw, tightening the mechanism that was about to spring. My first move was on the corporate calendar. At 7:00 a.m., I accessed the executive meeting schedule with my administrative credentials. I found the 8:30 a.m. entry. CSR update, M, Vale. I clicked edit. I didn't change the attendees or the location. I didn't even change the presenter. Mirabelle's name remained at the top. The designated owner of the event. I only changed the title. I deleted the bland, corporate speak, and replaced it with something that was both technically accurate and subtly menacing. The new title read, Transparency Walkthrough, Live Data Pull. The words themselves were an escalation, a shift from a passive update to an active demonstration. It implied a real-time audit, a level of scrutiny no one would have expected. It was a warning shot, but one couched in such perfect corporate jargon that to question it would be to appear resistant to transparency itself. I clicked Save, and the updated invitation silently propagated to the calendars of the entire board of directors. The first gear had engaged. The core of the mechanism relied on a feature designed not for destruction, but for security: two-factor authentication. In my capacity as an analyst, I had co-authored the company's protocol on secure data handling. I knew its architecture intimately. Any high-level query from a financial data warehouse, like the one housing the Helios fund records, required 2FA. After entering a password, the system would send a single-use, 6-digit token via SMS to the user's registered mobile number. Only by entering that token could the action be authorized. It was designed to create an unbreakable, auditable link between a person and a digital action, and Mirabelle's personal cell number was registered to her executive account. This was the beauty of the trap. I was not hacking the system. I was using it exactly as it was intended. When the moment came, the system would demand authorization for the data pull. It would send the token to Mirabelle's phone. She, standing at the head of the boardroom table, in front of the entire board, would have no choice but to enter it to proceed. In that moment, by her own hand, she would provide the cryptographic key to her own undoing. The system would not record my name. The audit log, a permanent and legally binding record, would state that the query was initiated and authorized by user ID MVale. Ownership of the action would be hers, and hers alone. The trigger for this action needed to be embedded within the presentation itself. I opened my modified PowerPoint file. The Trojan horse now sitting in the company's cloud, waiting to be opened. I went to slide 7. The slide was currently blank. A placeholder. I embedded a macro into the slide's on-show event. It wasn't complex code. It was a simple, elegant API call. The script would instruct the room's integrated presentation software to query the Helios data warehouse with a specific set of parameters. Display the 3 largest single outbound transactions to Apex Philanthropic Ventures within the last fiscal year. The query's results would be displayed directly on the screen, and at the bottom of the data table, the system would automatically add its digital watermark, its stamp of authenticity. Live query authorized by M. Vale. The presentation was the weapon. The API call was the ammunition. Mirabelle's 2FA token was the trigger. Next, I turned the room itself into a component of the machine. The executive boardroom on the 23rd floor was a technological marvel, a smart room. Using my system access, I logged into the room's control panel remotely. I created a new environmental rule. I labeled it Acoustic Privacy Mode. When activated, the rule would engage the magnetic locks on the boardroom doors and display a "Meeting in Progress, Do Not Disturb" message on the panels outside. The trigger for this rule? The initiation of screen sharing from the presenter's laptop to the main room display. The moment Mirabelle began her presentation, the room would be sealed, not with a clang of steel, but with the silent, firm click of an electromagnet. It was a feature, not a flaw. a way to ensure a high-level meeting would not be interrupted. It would also ensure there would be no escape. With the technical pieces in place, I addressed the human element. At 7:45 a.m., I picked up my phone and sent a text message, not to a lawyer, not to an ally, but to my father, Jonah. The message was simple, crafted from the language of his world. Dad, thinking of you this morning, at today's service, could you ask the prayer group to say an extra prayer for the victims of domestic violence? It feels important. The words were a perfect stiletto, sliding between the ribs of his piety. I was using his own spiritual currency against him, forcing him to confront a truth he had spent years ignoring, all while maintaining the facade of a devoted daughter. His reply came a few minutes later. It was not a question. It was not a word. It was a single emoji. The clasped hands of prayer, an automated, frictionless expression of faith. It was the most honest answer he could have given. I stared at the little yellow icon, then put my phone down. My response was not a text, but another administrative action. I logged into the financial reporting distribution system for Northbridge. I found the automated weekly report for the Helios Outreach Fund, the one that showed high-level expenditures and was sent to the board. I added one more name to the recipient list, Jonah Vale, his personal email address. He could no longer claim he didn't have the data. The next report was scheduled for delivery on Friday. The final piece of my own preparation was personal. I went to the small jewelry box my mother had left me. Inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was a simple silver ring she wore every day. It wasn't flashy. It was a signet ring, flat and unadorned, except for a single word engraved in a clean, sharp script. Notarize. To notarize is to witness, to certify, to confirm the truth of a signature or a fact. It was her personal motto, a belief in the power of bearing witness to the truth. I slid the cool metal onto the third finger of my right hand. It was a silent vow, a connection to the only person whose judgment I had ever truly trusted. I arrived at the office at 8 a.m., an hour and a half after I had started my work. I took the elevator to the 23rd floor. The executive wing was quiet, the thick carpet swallowing the sound of my footsteps. The boardroom was empty, the long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the gray morning light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. I went to the head of the table, the spot where Mirabelle would stand. I checked the connections for the projector, the conference call system, the speakers. I powered on the main screen. I activated the room's high-definition camera and adjusted its angle slightly, ensuring it had a clear, wide shot of the entire table, a panoramic view that would miss no detail, no flinch, no turning away of a face. Every hand would be visible. At 8:25 a.m., Mirabelle walked in. She moved with an easy, unshakable confidence, the ruler of her domain, a wave of her perfume, an expensive and suffocating floral scent, washed over the room, overpowering the faint, clean smell of the new projector bulb. She gave me a tight, professional smile. "Nora, good. You're here early," she said, setting her laptop down on the table. "Just a minor CSR update today. Shouldn't take long." I gave her a small, respectful nod. "Of course, Mirabelle. I'm just making sure the tech is ready for you." She did not notice the change in the meeting's title on the screen behind her. She did not notice the cool, steady certainty in my eyes. She did not feel the dozens of invisible threads I had tied to her chair, to her laptop, to her phone. She was a master of her universe, a woman who had built a career on turning systems to her advantage. She had no idea that I had simply reversed the polarity. The machine was the same, but the gears were now set to turn against the one who had wound it. She thought she was about to give a presentation. She had no idea she was about to pull the trigger herself. The boardroom on the 23rd floor was a capsule of pressurized air and expensive silence. 7 figures sat around the long mahogany table, a collection of the most powerful executives at Northbridge Mutual. Marcus Thorne, the chairman, was at the far end, his steepled fingers resting on a leather-bound notepad. David Sterling, the gimlet-eyed head of internal audit, sat to his right, his posture ramrod straight. They nursed their coffees and exchanged the low, meaningless chatter that precedes the start of business. I sat in a chair against the wall, just behind and to the side of the main table, an analyst present to provide technical support, an observer, a ghost at the feast. At precisely 8:31 a.m., Mirabelle cleared her throat. The chatter ceased. She smiled, a bright, confident expression that she wore like a piece of armor. She clicked open the latch on her laptop. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice smooth and modulated. "Thank you for your time. This will just be a small update on the Helios initiative, a brief walkthrough of our community engagement strategy." She connected her laptop to the presentation system. The massive 8K screen that dominated the far wall flickered to life, mirroring her desktop. She launched the file. Community Transparency Q3.ptx. The first slide appeared. It was a stock image of a diverse group of smiling people volunteering, overlaid with the Northbridge logo and the title in a clean sans serif font, a commitment to transparency. Heads around the table nodded in placid approval. It was the visual equivalent of elevator music. She clicked to the next slide. A beautiful, sun-drenched photograph of St. Laureate's Cathedral filled the screen. For a single, fractional moment, Mirabelle froze, a barely perceptible stiffening of her shoulders, a flicker in her eyes as they darted from the screen to her laptop and back again. It was the brief, confused pause of a driver who feels the steering wheel refuse to respond. But she was a professional. Her composure snapped back into place almost instantly. "Our partnership with key community institutions like St. Laureate's remains a cornerstone of our outreach," she said, her voice recovering its smooth cadence, though I could detect a new, brittle edge to it. The next few slides were autopilot. Slide 3 outlined the goals of the Helios Fund in soaring, meaningless prose. Slide 4 was a bar chart showing community investment year over year. Slide 5 was a bulleted list of approved, legitimate fund transfers to various well-known charities. I watched the board members. David Sterling was making a note. The others were beginning to relax. The familiar rhythm of a dull presentation lulling them into a state of corporate hypnosis. One was discreetly checking his watch. The tension in the room was dropping. The prey was becalmed. Mirabelle, seeming to regain her footing, navigated through the familiar territory of these slides with practiced ease. She was explaining a pie chart on slide 6 when she clicked for the next slide. Slide 7. The screen went blank, then displayed a simple gray system dialog box in the center. There were no graphics, only black text. Real-time data query requires 2FA authorization. Please enter the token sent to your registered device. Silence. The low hum of the HVAC system suddenly seemed deafening. Every eye in the room lifted from notepads and phones and fixed on the screen. Mirabelle stared at it, her mouth slightly agape. "I apologize," she said, forcing a small laugh. "A new security feature from IT, a bit overzealous." As she spoke, her phone, lying face down on the polished table beside her laptop, buzzed audibly, a short, sharp vibration against the wood. She looked at it as if it were a snake. Marcus Thorne, the chairman, leaned forward slightly. "Is there a problem, Mirabelle?" "No, of course not," she said quickly. Her smile was a rictus now. "We value security and transparency." She picked up the phone, her movements stiff. She swiped it open, her thumb tapping in the 6-digit code that had appeared on her screen. She hit Enter. The dialog box vanished. For a second, the screen was blank. Then, data flooded the slide. It was a clean table with 3 rows, detailing dates, transaction numbers, and amounts that were vastly larger than anything on the previous slides. At the bottom of the table, a new line of text appeared, rendered in the system's official font. Live query authorized by M. Vale. The moment the text appeared, 2 things happened in quick succession. From the doorway behind the board members came a soft but solid click, the unmistakable sound of a magnetic lock engaging. Simultaneously, On the small, discreet conference camera mounted above the screen, a tiny red indicator light blinked on. Recording. Mirabelle's head snapped toward the door, her eyes wide with the first real glint of panic, but the presentation, now on an automated timer, had already moved on. The screen changed. Slide 11, the dark red flowchart mapping the flow of funds from Helios to Marina Gate Services. Overlaid on the chart, in a semi-transparent layer, was the St. Laureate's public event calendar, with the Benevolent Fund prayer vigils circled. The dates on the calendar aligned perfectly with the dates of the largest transfers on the flowchart. In the bottom right corner, a QR code appeared. The room was utterly still. No one was looking at their phone now. The air crackled with a sudden, intense pressure. It was David Sterling, the head of audit, who finally broke the silence. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, fixed on Mirabelle. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. "Mirabelle," he said, "who is Marina Gate Services?" Mirabelle opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The slides kept coming. A new one appeared every 10 seconds. A relentless, automated prosecutor, bank confirmations, corporate registrations. Then, slide 18 appeared. It was a screenshot of an email, the test email she had sent to herself, the one that had carried the Trojan horse presentation. The screenshot included the full header data, the digital fingerprints showing it had originated from the specific desktop computer in her executive office. Her voice, when she found it, was high and strained. She pushed back from the table slightly and gave a short, sharp laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "This is absurd," she said, her eyes scanning the shocked faces of the board. "This is clearly a fake, a fabrication. My system has been compromised. This is a malicious attack." Her accusation hung in the air, a desperate gambit, but it was too late. The machine was already moving to the final, killing stroke. Before anyone could respond to her claim, the screen changed again. Slide 22. It was not a chart or a graph or a line of text. It was a photograph, a high-resolution, clinical close-up of my bruised wrist, the ruler laid beside it for scale. The skin was a sickening palette of purple and yellow. The doctor's name on the visible medical report snippet was blurred out, but the official ICD-10 diagnostic code was perfectly clear. And beneath the photo, the single, damning sentence, the corporate motto twisted into an accusation: "Benevolence is not violence." The image hung on the screen, a silent, brutal testament. All the air was sucked out of the room. The numbers and flowcharts were damning. But this was different. This was visceral. It transformed an abstract financial crime into a concrete act of human cruelty. The quiet clicking of the slide progression stopped. This was the final image. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a profound, heavy, sacred silence, the kind you find in a cathedral moments before the confession begins. Every eye was now on Mirabelle, her face a pale, frozen mask of horror, the predator, caged, the judge and jury, watching, the evidence, displayed in merciless high definition, for all to see. Across the city of Halberd, at precisely 8:59 a.m., the bells of St. Laureate's Cathedral began to toll. It was a deep, resonant sound, a call to the faithful that measured the slow, inexorable passage of time. The sound penetrated the insulated, double-paned glass of the 23rd floor boardroom, a faint, ghostly echo of a world outside. Inside that boardroom, the world had shrunk to the dimensions of a single, damning photograph on a screen. But 5 miles away, in a basement conference room of the cathedral known as the Parish Hall, another meeting was just beginning. The St. Laureate's Finance Committee was assembled around a long, folding table. My father, Jonah Vale, sat at its head, looking tired but composed. Eleanor, the treasurer, sat to his right, a plain manila envelope resting on the table in front of her. They were expecting a dry presentation on quarterly returns. At 9:00 a.m., as the last bell pealed, I performed my final action. From my seat against the wall in the Northbridge boardroom, I opened a new browser tab on my laptop. I navigated to a private streaming link I had set up earlier. I copied the URL. I then accessed the administrative controls for the AV system in the parish hall, another system my father had proudly given me access to. I pasted the link into the system's browser and pushed it live to their main projector screen. The command took less than a second. Simultaneously, in the church basement, the screen at the front of the room, which had been displaying the St. Laureate's crest, flickered. It was replaced by a live feed, a screen share of a presentation already in progress. The title read, "A Commitment to Transparency." Jonah frowned, confused. "That's not our agenda." At that moment, Eleanor picked up the manila envelope. Her movements were calm and deliberate. She broke the seal and slid out a 10-page summary of the Helios fund transfers, the dark red flowchart on top. She also removed a small black USB stick, which she plugged into the laptop connected to the projector. A new window popped open on the screen, showing a single video file. She didn't click on it. She just left it there, visible to all. The physical evidence was now in the room, corroborating the digital feed. Back on the 23rd floor, at that exact instant, another set of triggers fired. A discreet executive assistant entered the boardroom, walked silently to the head of the table, and placed an identical manila envelope in front of the chairman, Marcus Thorne. Thorne looked at the envelope, then at Mirabel, a deep frown creasing his brow. At the same time, a cascade of soft chimes and vibrations rippled around the table. The failsafe had activated. My scheduled email, the one containing the flowchart and the subject line, "For Council Review," had just arrived in the inboxes of every single person in the room. Heads dropped as they glanced at their phones and tablets. Their faces, already pale, turned to shades of ash. They were now surrounded by the evidence. A full 360-degree assault of data from the main screen, their personal devices, and the sealed envelope lying before their chairman. The presentation on the main screen, indifferent to the human drama, continued its automated advance. Slide 29. The screen was now filled with the grainy, wide-angle footage from the foyer security camera. There was no sound, only the silent, damning ballet of the scene. The video played in a slow-motion loop. Mirabel's hand, a pale blur, my head snapping back, the timestamp in the corner of the frame, 12:37 p.m., a perfect match for the volunteer log they had all just seen in their email. The footage was clinical, stripped of emotion, which only made it more brutal. It was pure, unadorned fact. I risked a glance around the boardroom. Faces were frozen in a mixture of shock and disgust. This was no longer just about money. The crime had a face and a victim, and she was sitting in the room with them. In the parish hall, the finance committee watched the same silent video on their projector screen. I could picture the scene perfectly. They saw their COO, the wife of their esteemed CFO, committing an act of base violence within the sacred walls of their own church. And then I pictured my father, Jonah, watching his wife's hand strike his daughter's face. He was a man who lived his life in the abstract realms of faith and finance, but this was not abstract. This was a video. The screen reflected in his eyes. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped back loudly against the linoleum floor. His hand, reaching for the wireless microphone on the table, knocked it off. It hit the thin carpet with a dull, hollow thud, the sound amplified by the room's speakers into a deafening boom. A feedback squeal tore through the room before someone killed the sound. But everyone had seen him, the patriarch, stripped bare in the basement of his own temple. Mirabel had turned from the screen. Her face was a mask of cold, concentrated fury. She wasn't looking at the board. She was looking at me. She leaned almost imperceptibly in my direction, her voice a low, venomous whisper that only I could hear over the hum of the server fans. "You will destroy this family." I didn't turn my head. I continued to look straight ahead, my face impassive. My own voice, when I replied, was just as quiet, just as cold. It was the voice I used to read data points in a technical review. "You already did," I said. I'm just stating the numbers. The screen changed. The video loop was replaced by text. Slide 34. It was a direct screenshot from the Northbridge Mutual Corporate Charter, Article 4, Section 3, Employee Code of Conduct. The paragraph was highlighted in yellow. Any act of financial misconduct, including but not limited to self-dealing, embezzlement, or the misdirection of corporate funds for personal gain, shall be grounds for immediate termination of employment and potential legal action. The rule was absolute. There were no loopholes for executives. The presentation was no longer just presenting evidence. It was delivering the verdict, using the company's own words as the gavel. Slide 38, the final piece of the financial puzzle. It was a scanned copy of a letter from the bank's corporate services division. It was a confirmation of a wire transfer authorization from the Helios account. It contained the date, the amount, the recipient, Apex Philanthropic Ventures, and the authorizing signature. It was not a wet ink signature. It was a digital one, a cryptographically secure marker that was as legally binding as a fingerprint, and the name rendered in the digital script was unmistakable. M. Vale. That was checkmate, the final, irrefutable link. The system she had used to move the money had also served as the perfect, impartial witness against her. The slide held for 10 seconds, then vanished. Slide 40. The screen went black, a deep, absolute black that seemed to absorb all the light and sound in the room. After a moment of darkness, a single line of white text faded into view in the center of the vast screen. It was the thesis statement, the final word, the sentence that tied the embezzlement in the spreadsheets to the violence in the foyer. Transparency is not violence. The text glowed in the silent, darkened room for a full minute before it, too, faded away, leaving only the black screen and the stunned, suffocating silence of the aftermath. The black screen was a void, and into that void, all the sound and oxygen in the boardroom had been pulled. The silence was not empty. It was dense and heavy, packed with shock, calculation, and the frantic whirring of powerful minds assessing liability. For a full minute, no one moved. They were a tableau of expensive suits and stunned disbelief, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of their still active tablets. It was Marcus Thorne, the chairman, who broke the spell. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words, low and cold as glacial ice, cut through the silence and landed with the force of a physical blow. He looked directly at Mirabelle, his gaze stripped of all collegiality. "Mirabelle," he said, the name itself an indictment. "Do you have anything to say?" It was a corporate formality, a final chance to offer a defense before the axe fell. I saw Mirabelle's throat work as she swallowed. I saw the desperate, last-second calculations in her eyes. She drew herself up, a flicker of her old, defiant arrogance returning. A cold, brittle smile touched her lips. "Everything I did," she said, her voice strained but steady, "was for the good of the community, to streamline our philanthropic footprint, to maximize our impact." It was a pathetic, audacious lie, an attempt to rebrand grand larceny as charity. Before Marcus Thorne could even respond, another voice, sharp and precise, sliced through her defense. It was David Sterling, the head of internal audit. He didn't even look at Mirabelle. His eyes were fixed on the dark screen as if he could still see the flowchart. "The Marina Gate Services community, specifically?" he asked, the question a drop of acid. The lie dissolved on contact. Mirabelle's smile faltered, and at that exact moment, the boardroom doors burst open. It was Jonah, my father. He didn't stride in. He stumbled, propelled into the room by a force of pure, panicked momentum. He looked like a man who had just run across a desert. His face was chalk white and slick with sweat. His normally immaculate suit was rumpled, his tie askew. His eyes were wide and frantic, darting around the room, not seeing the powerful men at the table, only seeing the wreckage. His gaze found me first, sitting still and silent against the wall. There was a universe of confusion and betrayal in that look. Then, his eyes were drawn to the massive, dark screen at the front of the room, as if on cue. My final command to the presentation software activated. The black screen came to life one last time, not with text, but with the silent, looping video from the church foyer. My father stared at the grainy footage of his wife's hand striking his daughter's face, playing over and over in a hypnotic, brutal cycle. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, to face Mirabelle. The one word that came from his lips was a choked, broken sound, a name turned into a question that held the weight of his entire world shattering. Mirabelle? She saw him, and for a second, her mask of defiance crumbled, revealing the raw panic beneath. But she recovered, turning to her last and most basic defense, to attack the source. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She's lying," Mirabelle hissed, her voice cracking. "It's all lies. She faked all of it. The video, the records. She's unstable. She's trying to destroy me, to destroy us." The accusation was wild, pathetic in the face of the mountain of cryptographic signatures and system logs they had all just received. The board members looked away, embarrassed for her. My father just stared, lost. I did not respond to her accusation. I didn't need to. I pushed my chair back, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. I stood up. From the leather satchel at my side, I removed a single, folded document. I walked the length of the table, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. I did not look at Mirabelle or my father. I stopped beside Marcus Thorne's chair and placed the folded paper on the polished mahogany in front of him. I unfolded it. It was the report from my visit to Dr. Sharma that morning, the official summary of my examination. I looked at Mirabelle, my expression as neutral as a blank sheet of paper, and spoke a single word. Evidence. The physical document on the table seemed to be the final straw, the tangible fact that broke the spell of digital disbelief. It was real. It was paper. It could be touched. Arthur Vance, the general counsel, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat and took command. His voice was the antidote to chaos, procedural, unemotional, and absolute. He was no longer a colleague. He was the company's immune system, moving to isolate a pathogen. "Marcus," he said, addressing the chairman directly, "I am formally recommending the immediate suspension of Ms. Vale, effective as of this moment, pending the results of a special and independent investigation. I am also recommending we freeze the entire Helios system, place a legal hold on all relevant data servers, and issue a full preservation order for all of Miss Vale's electronic and physical records." He was building a legal fortress around the company in real time. As he spoke, another series of soft vibrations buzzed across the table. David Sterling glanced down at his phone. His eyebrows shot up. "It seems St. Laureate's is moving as well," he announced to the room. "I'm on a text thread with their treasurer, Eleanor Vance. She just notified the entire church finance committee that the benevolent fund is being suspended immediately. They're launching a full, independent external audit." Another wall in Mirabelle's world had just turned to dust. The church, her husband's sanctuary of power and influence, had just excommunicated her. Her professional life was over. Her social standing was vaporized. My father stood broken and useless. She was utterly, completely alone. She finally turned her gaze fully on me. The desperation was gone, replaced by a final, condensed core of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her voice was low, a guttural sound. "What do you want?" she asked. The question was a raw nerve. What was the price? What was the demand? What could she possibly offer to make this stop? I met her gaze without flinching. The silver ring on my finger felt cool and solid. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting her absorb the totality of her defeat. Then I gave her my answer, the only answer there had ever been. The end. The word hung in the air, a final, spare punctuation mark on a decade of quiet suffering. It was not a plea or a threat. It was a statement of fact, a declaration that the system had reached its terminal state. The reaction in the boardroom was not emotional. It was procedural. The moment the confrontation concluded, the human drama was over, and the corporate machinery, designed for damage control, engaged with terrifying speed and efficiency. Marcus Thorne, the chairman, did not look at Mirabelle or my father. He looked at the general counsel. "Arthur, you have the floor," he said, his voice flat. Arthur Vance nodded. "I move for a vote by the board of directors. The motion is as follows: to place Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer Mirabelle Vale on immediate, indefinite administrative leave, to revoke all physical and digital access privileges, and to authorize the legal department to prepare a formal notification to shareholders regarding a material event involving a senior executive to be released at the close of market today." Second, David Sterling, the auditor, said instantly. "All in favor?" Thorne asked, his gaze sweeping the table. 7 hands went up without hesitation. There was no discussion, no debate. It was a unanimous vote. 7-0. A clean, decisive amputation. The entire process took less than 30 seconds. As the hands went down, Arthur Vance was already speaking into his phone. "Initiate lockdown protocol. User ID M. Vale. Full preservation order. Yes. All systems. Now." The response was instantaneous. A series of notifications began to appear on the tablets of the board members. It was the digital bloodstream of the company rerouting itself in real time. Alert. All administrative tokens for the Helios Outreach Fund have been reset. Alert. User MVale access credentials have been suspended across all platforms. Alert. A legal hold has been placed on all data associated with the account. The company was cauterizing the wound, isolating the infection with a firewall of pure protocol. The speed was breathtaking. Mirabelle was being digitally unpersoned before she had even left the room. Across town, a similar, though less technical, purge was happening. Eleanor, the church treasurer, a woman who had chosen not to see an assault but who would not ignore a spreadsheet, had acted. At 9:15 a.m., an official notice appeared on the homepage of the St. Laureate's Cathedral website, replacing the usual cheerful announcement about the upcoming bake sale. The language was carefully vetted, devoid of names but clear in its implications. "Effective immediately," the notice read, "St. Laureate's Cathedral will no longer be accepting grants or donations from the Northbridge Mutual Helios Outreach Fund, pending a full and independent audit of our benevolent fund. Furthermore, in our commitment to serving all members of our community in times of crisis, we are establishing a new confidential hotline and resource center for victims of domestic violence. If you or someone you know is in need of help, please reach out. We are here to listen." It was a masterstroke of institutional self-preservation, simultaneously distancing the church from the financial scandal while rebranding it as a proactive protector of the abused. They had taken my evidence and turned it into a public relations opportunity. I felt a flicker of something cold and cynical, but not surprise. My father, Jonah, was still standing in the boardroom, a ghost at the execution of the life he had built. He seemed to shrink before my eyes, the air of authority and divine confidence evaporating, leaving behind a confused, broken old man. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. To acknowledge me would be to acknowledge his own profound, catastrophic failure. He turned to Marcus Thorne, his voice a hoarse whisper. I must return to the church. I must apologize." He was speaking of the finance committee. His apology would be to them, for the institutional embarrassment, for the financial impropriety that had happened under his watch. It was an apology for the breach of protocol, not for the years of silent complicity in the abuse of his own child. He stumbled out of the room without another word, a man rushing to save the ruins of his reputation. Later, I would hear that he had offered his formal resignation as CFO, which was swiftly accepted. The final act in the boardroom was the removal. Marcus Thorne nodded to the head of corporate security, a large, impassive man who had been waiting silently by the now unlocked door. He stepped forward and approached Mirabelle, who was still standing, frozen, by her chair. "Ma'am," the security chief said, his voice polite but unyielding, "if you'll come with me." He did not touch her. He didn't have to. The authority in his presence was absolute. Mirabelle looked one last time around the room, at the faces of the men who had been her peers, her colleagues. They would not meet her eyes. Their gazes were directed at their notepads, their tablets, the polished surface of the table. She was already gone. She walked out of the room, flanked by 2 security officers. I listened to her footsteps fade down the carpeted hallway. I knew the path she was taking, not to the executive elevator, but to a service elevator in the back. She would be taken to her office to collect her personal belongings under supervision, then escorted to the main lobby and out of the building. I imagined her final moment inside. Standing at the security turnstiles by the main entrance, she would hold her corporate ID card, the one with her smiling, confident face on it, to the scanner. The light would not turn green. Instead, a harsh, continuous electronic beep would sound. The system's loud, flat rejection, access denied, an alarm for a person who no longer belonged. The sound of her erasure, long and loud, like a final, graceless trumpet blast at the end of a sordid ceremony. I remained in my chair against the wall until the room was empty, save for myself and the general counsel. Arthur Vance. He was gathering his papers, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He paused and looked at me. "The board has authorized a fully paid, indefinite leave of absence for you as well. Nora," he said, "to process these events, there will also be a significant bonus issued for identifying a material risk to the company." It was the system's way of saying thank you, and please go away while we clean this up. "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "But thank you, Arthur." I stood, picked up my satchel, and walked out. I did not return to my desk. I took the elevator down to the lobby. As the car descended, I sent one last email from my phone. It was addressed to Eleanor, the church treasurer. The subject was volunteer resignation. The body contained a single sentence. "Please accept my immediate withdrawal from the finance volunteer group." I hit send. Another tie severed. Clean. Final. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was a text message from an unknown number, but I knew who it was from. Arthur Vance. The message was as spare and functional as the man himself. "You are safe. The system is locked down. All evidence is preserved." It wasn't a message of triumph or congratulation. It was a statement of legal reality. The threat had been neutralized. The data was secure. I was safe. The elevator doors opened into the vast marble lobby. I walked toward the main entrance, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. As I walked, I reached up with my other hand and slid the silver ring from my finger, the one engraved with the word notarize. The metal was warm from my skin. The work was done. The truth had been witnessed, certified, and entered into the record. I dropped the ring into the side pocket of my satchel. It landed with a soft, muffled clink, and as it did, I felt a subtle, seismic shift within my own body, a knot of tension in my shoulders, a knot I had carried for so long I had forgotten it was there. Finally, slowly, began to unwind. My shoulders physically dropped by a fraction of an inch. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first one that felt like it had reached the bottom of my lungs in years. There had been no applause in the boardroom, no words of praise, only the hum of the air conditioning and the cold, indifferent glare of the fluorescent lights. There was no victory party, no celebration. This was not a moment of joy. It was a balancing of accounts, a correction of a corrupted system. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the street. The Halberd city air hit me, cool and damp. It carried the smell of ozone from the traffic, of wet pavement, and something else, something sharp and clean, the smell of metallic rain. Just about to fall. My phone began to vibrate in my coat pocket. It was a persistent, insistent buzz against my hip. I didn't need to look. I knew who it was. The pressure of the world, the weight of a father's belated conscience, trying to break through. I continued walking. the rhythm of my footsteps on the concrete, a steady metronome against the phone's frantic pulse. I let it ring. One full cycle, then a second. He was a man who had never been ignored, a man whose calls were always answered, whose summons were always obeyed. The vibration stopped, then immediately started again. His desperation was a tangible force, reaching across the city's wireless networks. On the third ring, I slid the phone from my pocket. The screen glowed with his name, Jonah Vale. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I felt a profound and weary sense of finality. My thumb moved to the side of the device and pressed the volume down button until the screen went dark and the vibration ceased. I did not decline the call. I silenced it. I was leaving the necessary space for the truth to do its work. His truth, not mine. The silence was his to fill now, and I would not be the one to absolve him of it. My path, unplanned, had taken me on a wide, circuitous route through the city's financial district. The canyons of glass and steel seemed different now, less oppressive. They were no longer the monuments to a power structure I was trapped within, but simply buildings, structures of logic and right angles, governed by the laws of physics, not the whims of corrupt executives. And then I saw it, up ahead, the spires of St. Laureate's Cathedral, piercing the gray, overcast sky. I found myself walking past it, on the opposite side of the street. I kept my distance, as if from a site of a recent, traumatic accident. The great oak doors of the foyer, the doors I had held open just yesterday, were slightly ajar. From this distance, the dark opening looked like a wound, a clean incision that was already beginning to close, the shadows within like the beginning of a scar. My eyes were drawn to the wall beside the entrance, to the spot where a polished brass sign had once hung. The sign was gone. In its place were two small, fresh holes in the limestone, the pale, raw stone exposed where the nails had been. The benevolent fund had been officially excised, its memory a ghost on the wall. The speed of the erasure was an act of institutional panic, a desperate attempt to pretend the disease had never been there at all. I stopped walking. I took out my phone again, my fingers moving with a cool, detached purpose. I opened my messaging app and found the contact for Eleanor Vance, the treasurer, the woman who had seen and said nothing, and then had seen and done everything. My text was short, a final piece of operational advice. "Keep the nursery camera," I typed, "and keep it running. It's more useful than most of the sermons." I hit send without waiting for a reply. It was not the beginning of a conversation. It was a closing statement. I turned away from the church and continued my walk. My direction now aimed back toward the heart of the city. As I passed the monolithic Northbridge Mutual Tower, I caught my reflection in the vast, tinted glass panels of its lobby. For years, I had seen myself only in relation to others. In the reflection, I was Jonah Vale's quiet daughter, or Mirabelle Vale's resentful stepdaughter. At work, my own physical presence felt like a satellite in her powerful orbit. My shadow was always subsumed by hers, but now, as I looked at the glass, my reflection was singular, a solitary figure, outlined against the backdrop of the city, my own shape, my own shadow, sharp and distinct, and wholly my own. She was gone, not just from the building, but from the space she had occupied in my silhouette. I stopped, facing my own image in the glass. I took a deep breath, the cool, damp air filling my lungs. It felt clean. For the first time, clean. My left wrist, tucked into the pocket of my coat, gave a dull, throbbing ache. It was a reminder of the price of this transaction, a physical record of the debt that had now been paid. But as I held my hand out in front of me, there was no tremor. The shaking, the fine, high-frequency vibration of adrenaline and fear that had been my constant companion for years was gone. The pain was still there, but the fear had been excised. "We forgive." My father's voice echoed in my memory, a ghost from a sermon that felt a lifetime ago. He spoke the words with such serene, unearned confidence, as if forgiveness were a simple currency to be dispensed, wiping all ledgers clean. a tool to reset the board without ever acknowledging the foul that had been committed. Standing there on the pavement, a stranger to my own newfound stillness, I repeated the sentiment, but I translated it into my own language, the language of accountability, the language of the ledger. "We account," I whispered to my reflection. It was not about vengeance, it was about the simple, immutable mathematics of cause and effect. It was about ensuring the final sum was correct. You do not forgive a fraudulent entry in a ledger. You correct it. You issue a debit and a credit. You balance the books. My hand slipped into my coat pocket, my fingers closing around the cool, solid weight of my mother's silver ring. I felt the crisp, engraved edges of the word notarize. The act of witnessing was complete. The testimony had been given, the evidence presented, the truth certified, and entered into the permanent record. The long, painful process of stitching a torn reality back together was finished. The needle had sewn its final stitch. There is no epilogue, no chapter detailing the trials, the lawsuits, the eventual fate of Jonah and Mirabel. There is no scene of me starting a new life in a new city under a new name. That is not the point. The point was not the aftermath. The point was the act itself, the restoration of order, the balancing of the equation. It is not a story about healing, it is a story about resolution. The objective was met. The project is complete. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It's been an intense journey, and I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and let's connect. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And finally, if you could hit the hype button, it would be a huge help in getting this story heard by more people. Thank you again.